On July 1st, 1994, Brazil introduced a new currency. The real, 1 real, was set equal to 2,750 units of the previous currency, the cruzeiro real, which had itself replaced the cruzeiro, which had replaced the cruzado novo, which had replaced the cruzado, which had replaced the cruzeiro novo, which had replaced the original cruzeiro of 1942. 6 currencies in 52 years. If the réis of pre-1942 Brazil had survived to 1994, 1 real would now be worth 2.75 quintillion réis. This is the archive of a country that needed 5 tries to get money right. The warning signs were not in the 1980s, they were in the 1960s. Brazil's modern inflation history begins after World War II. Annual inflation averaged 8% in the late 1940s. By 1959, it crossed 30%. By 1964, 80%. The country had a structural inflation problem before any of the famous reforms of the 1980s were imagined. The institutional response was indexation. Starting in 1964, the military regime introduced the world's most sophisticated inflation indexation system. Bonds with daily monetary correction, wages indexed to past inflation, rent contracts adjusted monthly. By the 1970s, the entire Brazilian economy was running on a parallel set of inflation-adjusted accounts. Indexation allowed the country to function with 30% annual inflation. It also made any future reform structurally impossible. Every contract was now legally bound to pass inflation, and stopping inflation meant breaking every contract simultaneously. By the early 1980s, the foreign debt crisis added a second source of monetary expansion. Public enterprise losses, foreign debt servicing, and central bank credit line lending to the Treasury. All required monetary creation. The deficit monetization loop began. The 1985 return of civilian rule under José Sarney inherited a country with 30 years of chronic inflation, comprehensive indexation, and an exhausted fiscal model. 5 reform attempts would follow in 7 years. None would address the fiscal anchor. The trigger was not a single event, it was a pattern of failures. Plan 1, Cruzado Plan, February 28, 1986. Finance Minister Dilson Funaro under President José Sarney. The cruzeiro became the cruzado at a ratio of 1,000 to 1. 3 zeros struck, prices frozen. The first weeks were euphoric. Inflation dropped to near zero. Then demand exploded under frozen prices. Shortages everywhere. Black markets formed. By November, the plan was already failing. Cruzado Plan 2 was a damage control package. Both died within 12 months. Plan 2, Bresser Plan, June 1987, Finance Minister Bresser Pereira. New price freeze, new fiscal targets, new monetary committee. Failed within 6 months. The fiscal anchor was never credible because the underlying budget was never balanced. Plan 3, Verão Plan, January 1989. Finance Minister Mailson da Nóbrega. New currency, Cruzado Novo. 3 more zeros struck. Wage and price freeze. Failed within 4 months. Sarney was a lame duck president by then. The political authority required to enforce a freeze was gone. Plan 4, Collor Plan, March 1990. Newly elected Fernando Collor and Finance Minister Zélia Cardoso de Mello. The most radical of the 5, a full asset freeze. Savings accounts above the equivalent of $1,000 were frozen at the central bank for 18 months. Cruzado Novo renamed back to cruzeiro at 1-to-1. Price freeze again. Inflation collapsed briefly. Then the structural fiscal problems reasserted. The asset freeze became a political catastrophe that would help force Collor's impeachment by December 1992. Plan 5, Collor Plan 2, February 1991. Minor adjustments. Failed. Collor impeached the following year. 5 plans, 6 finance ministers, 3 new currencies, 20,000 pages of decrees. Inflation kept rising. The pattern that emerges from the data is a sawtooth. By the end of 1989, monthly inflation was running above 50%. In December 1989, 51.3% in a single month. In March 1990, the inflation rate reached 82.2% in a single month. That is the highest monthly print in Brazilian history. The Collor Plan of March 1990 dropped monthly inflation to 14% in April. Within 12 months, it was back above 20. By 1992, monthly rates climbed back into the 30s. By mid-1993, near 40. The Collor asset freeze had hurt savers and not solved the budget. Annual inflation in 1990 reached nearly 3,000%. In 1993, nearly 2,500. The data does not show a single peak. It shows a chronic pattern punctuated by escalating spikes. This is the structural difference between Brazil and the canonical hyperinflations. In Weimar Germany, the currency died in 18 months. In Hungary, 1946, in less than a year. In Yugoslavia, 1994, in 22 months. Brazil's currency had been dying since 1964, 30 years and still going. The supermarkets had a system. Every morning, an employee with a calculator and a roll of stickers would walk down each aisle and retag every item. Some shops did this twice a day. The price on a packet of rice in Sao Paulo in 1989 could change 3 times between Monday and Friday. Brazilians learned to read shelf tags backwards in time. The 5 plans had failed because they all addressed the symptom, visible price increases, by freezing them. None had addressed the cause, the inertia of an economy that had been indexed for 30 years. The 6th plan would not freeze anything. What did 50 years of inflation do to people who lived through it? By the late 1980s, Brazilian middle-class life had reorganized itself around inflation. Salaries were paid into bank accounts that paid daily overnight interest indexed to that day's inflation. The financial sector competed not on long-term returns, but on overnight rates. Banks ran what amounted to industrial-scale inflation arbitrage operations. The result was a 2-tier monetary system. People with sophisticated bank accounts kept up with inflation. People without, pensioners, rural workers, the urban poor, lost purchasing power on every paycheck before it could be spent. The indexation system that allowed Brazil to function chronically also entrenched chronic inequality. On March 16, 1990, the newly inaugurated Collor government did something none of the previous plans had attempted. It froze access to private bank accounts. Every Brazilian with savings above approximately $1,000 woke up to find their money locked at the Banco Central for 18 months. The intention was to reduce the money supply. The effect was political devastation. Tens of millions of middle-class families saw their savings sequestered. Many never recovered the full real value. In daily life, inflation became invisible labor. The middle-class households spent hours a week calculating real costs and shifting currencies. Restaurants printed daily menus. Schools issued new tuition statements monthly. Doctors quoted appointment fees in US dollars and accepted payment in cruzeiros at the day's rate. For 30 years, Brazil ran on this scaffolding. 5 reforms tried to remove it. None of them did. The 6th plan was different. Fernando Henrique Cardoso took the finance ministry in May 1993 under President Itamar Franco. He inherited inflation near 40% monthly, 5 failed plans, and a population convinced no reform could work. His team, Edmar Bacha, Persio Arida, André Lara Resende, Gustavo Franco, Pedro Malan, Winston Frich, designed something none of the previous plans had attempted. They did not freeze prices. On March 1, 1994, they introduced a parallel unit of account called the URV, Unidade Real de Valor. The URV was not a currency. It did not circulate as cash. It was a fictional unit, pegged daily to the US dollar, used to denominate prices, wages, and contracts. For 4 months, Brazilians had 2 parallel accounting systems. The cruzeiro real continued to inflate. The URV stayed constant in real terms. Every supermarket, every employer, every bank, every contract translated their cruzeiro real prices into URV daily. The population was given 4 months to internalize stable URV-denominated prices while still transacting in cruzeiros reais. On July 1, 1994, the URV stopped being a unit of account and became the new currency. 1 real equaled 1 URV equaled 2,750 cruzeiros reais. Monthly inflation fell from 46% in June 1994 to single digits within 6 months. By 1995, annual inflation was 22%. By 1997, 5%. The fiscal anchor, quietly built through the Plano de Ação Imediata of 1993 and the Fundo Social de Emergência, held. Cardoso resigned the finance ministry to run for president. He won the October 1994 election in the first round. The real had stabilized in time to be a political product. The real has held for over 30 years. From the launch in July 1994 to today, Brazilian annual inflation has stayed below 10% in 24 of those years, and below 5% in most. The currency has appreciated and depreciated against the dollar through Brazilian commodity cycles, political transitions, the 2002 election, and the 2014-2016 fiscal crisis. But it has not been redenominated. 6 currencies in 52 years became 1 currency for the next 30. The Brazilian pattern is different from Yugoslavia, 1994. where 5 redenominations during the spiral did nothing, and different from Bolivia, 1985, where a single fiscal anchor decree ended hyperinflation in days. Brazil needed to undo indexation before the anchor could hold. The URV was a 4-month bridge between two monetary regimes, designed specifically for an economy that had institutionalized inflation for 30 years. The trigger was different in each case. The mechanism that worked was different in each case. Both reforms held. This episode is supported by a private community I run. The people who care about pattern recognition, when monetary policy fails the same way in different decades and different continents, what the common shape actually is, why some reforms catch and most do not, the applied case studies. The link is in the description, not a newsletter, not a brokerage, just the same archive, the same source rigor, in a smaller room with people who want to keep going. 6 currencies, 52 years, 12 zeros struck from the 1942 cruzeiro to the 1994 real, 15 zeros if traced back to the réis era, a peak monthly inflation of 82.2% in March 1990, 5 reforms that did not work, 1 reform that did. The first 5 reforms changed the name. The 6th changed the regime. The URV was not a price freeze. It was a slow translation between 2 ways of denominating the same economy. And it was the 4 months of stable URV prices that broke 30 years of inflation expectations. Money is a contract. The contract can break. In Brazil, it was broken 6 times. The 7th held.